Welcome to meeting number 52 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room as well as remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the members as well as the witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please do mute yourselves when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom is at the bottom of your screen, and you have a choice of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Now, in accordance with our previous practice, I'd like to inform everyone that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, June 20th, 2022, the committee now resumes its study of the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women globally. Now, it's my great pleasure to welcome to our committee, first of all, from the Guttmacher Institute, the principal research scientist, Ms. Elizabeth Sully. Also from the International Planned Parenthood Federation, we have the Director General. Great to have you, Dr. Alvaro Bermejo. And lastly, from the Parliament of the Republic of Uganda, we have the Member of Parliament, the Honourable Lucy Akello. So welcome to you all. Thank you for being here with us today. You will each be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open it to the members for questions. I should say, once you only have 30 seconds remaining, I will put this up as a sign that you should really be in the process of wrapping up your comments. And that applies not only with respect to your opening remarks, but when you're in the process of answering questions from the members. So all of that having been said, Ms. Sully, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, members. The Guttmacher Institute is a leading research and policy organization committed to advancing sexual and reproductive health and rights worldwide. We're at a critical juncture globally. We've achieved substantial progress over the last few decades. The number of women using modern contraception has risen, unintended pregnancy is declining globally, maternal deaths are dropping, and legal access to abortion is expanding. However, as of 2019, there were 218 million women in low and middle income countries with an unmet need for modern contraceptive methods. This resulted in 111 million unintended pregnancies annually and 35 million unsafe abortions. We're also at risk of backsliding on the progress that we've achieved with a global opposition to SRHR that's emboldened by the recent overturning of Roe in the United States. I want to highlight for the committee today two main areas where greater investment and leadership is needed to ensure SRHR globally. First, through our decades of conducting research with global partners, what the data clearly show is that investing in a comprehensive package of SRH services is a smart cost savings investment that protects health and saves lives. Investing in a comprehensive package of services can result in substantial gains. For example, if all women in low and middle income countries wanting to avoid a pregnancy were to use modern contraception, and all pregnant women and their newborns were to receive care at international standards, we would see a 2/3 decline in unintended pregnancies, unsafe abortions, and maternal and newborn deaths, and an 88% drop in HIV infections among babies 6 weeks and younger. When investments are made in a comprehensive package of services, there are also important cost savings to the health system. Every additional dollar that's invested in modern contraceptive services would save $3 on pregnancy-related and newborn care through preventing unintended pregnancies. Investing in maternal and newborn health is essential and important, but insufficient on its own. A comprehensive investment is necessary to really make an impact on reducing preventable maternal deaths, to ensuring bodily autonomy, and to reduce health systems costs. The second point I want to make to the committee is that global leadership is needed now to protect and expand on the gains that we have achieved in safe abortion access. People around the world have and need abortions. That is not going to change. Globally, more than 60% of all unintended pregnancies end in abortion. That's 73 million abortions annually. Legal restrictions do not stop abortions from happening. We find no evidence that the abortion rate differs in countries where abortion is restricted versus where it is legally allowed. Abortion restrictions instead lead to more unsafe abortions. There are an estimated 21 million abortion complications annually in low and middle income countries. However, if all unsafe abortions were made safe, that would drop to 2 million, and there would be a 45% reduction in the health system's costs of providing abortion care. Providing safe abortion care saves lives, it respects rights, and it reduces the costs. The United States has become a global outlier by eliminating the right to abortion. This is in stark contrast to decades of progress on abortion rights, with the global trend towards liberalization of abortion laws. Nearly 60 countries have expanded the legal grounds for abortion since 1994. We need global leadership to support countries in their efforts to expand safe abortion access. Supporting safe abortion means investing in filling the evidence gaps, it means strengthening advocacy, and it means expanding access to abortion services. Canada has made a historic commitment to SRHR. My team at the Guttmacher Institute has conducted 2 studies estimating the impact of Canada's investment in family planning over the last few years. We find that as of fiscal year 2020 to 2021, Canada invested $63.5 million in family planning. That resulted in 2.5 million women and couples receiving contraceptive services, preventing 1.1 million unintended pregnancies, 347,000 unsafe abortions, and resulting in 1,800 lives saved. Canada can have similar impacts on the other neglected areas of SRHR. We're facing a global backlash, and countless allied low and middle income country governments and civil society organizations want to secure comprehensive SRHR in their countries. But to do this, they need support, and they need Canada's support. They need data and evidence to support their efforts. They need funding to expand services within their health systems, and they need political support and strong and vocal global leadership. How countries respond to sexual and reproductive health and rights is really a story about how much societies do and do not value women. Canada has made its voice clear that it values women through its feminist international assistance policy and its historic new funding commitment to SRHR. I hope that the facts and evidence I have shared today demonstrate why it's imperative that Canada continues to put these values into action on the global stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sully. We next go to Dr. Bermejo. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, committee members and fellow panelists. The International Planned Parenthood Federation, IPPF for short, is a global service provider and a leading advocate of sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. Today, IPPF has become a worldwide federation of 119 national member associations and 29 collaborative partners working with and for communities in 149 countries. These local member associations are nationally owned and governed civil society organizations and leading sexual and reproductive health service providers in their respective countries. This gives IPPF a global presence unparalleled amongst other sexual and reproductive health and rights civil society organizations. We defend the right of all people to enjoy their sexual lives free from ill health, unintended pregnancy, violence, and discrimination. We deliver comprehensive sexuality education to young people in and out of school to help them both understand and claim their sexual rights. And we support a woman's right to terminate her pregnancy legally and safely. As an international federation, IPPF provides a platform for member associations and stakeholder groups from around the world to come together. Our global presence makes IPPF a powerful advocate for sexual and reproductive health and rights at all levels. We are, in a way, a living expression of the universality of sexual and reproductive health and rights, and an expression of global solidarity. I want to endorse everything that my colleague Elizabeth Sully from the Guttmacher Institute has said, and maybe just spend a couple of minutes looking at what she has called the backlash. From where I sit,
Mr. Bermejo, we can't hear you. We're having some technical difficulties. Yes.
Okay, we have to suspend?
Yeah, because I need to go grab the technician too.
Okay, we have to suspend the meeting altogether.
Okay, we'll just suspend for a few minutes.
Chair, can we just go to the next witness and come back to him to
No,
continue?
we have to suspend.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
the whole meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Bermejo.
Suspend.
So, Dr. Bermejo, we're back. We're terribly sorry for the technical challenges we were experiencing, but we will reset the clock for you, and you can commence from the very start again, if you so wish. Is that your intention?
No, I aim to be a little bit shorter and not repeat everything at the beginning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. So you can resume from wherever you prefer. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you. And good morning again, everybody. Apologies for that interruption. I am speaking on behalf of the International Planned Parenthood Federation, IPPF, which is a federation of 119 member associations, national civil society organizations that provide sexual and reproductive health services. We provided 200 million services last year through our 40,000 clinics around the world. We provide advocacy and we provide comprehensive
Bermejo, my
sexuality education.
apologies. Translation is not working. 1 second.
Oh,
It is the sound quality that is not sufficient to provide the interpretation.
oh my God.
Do I ask him to unplug and plug his mic again? Could you unplug and plug your headset, please, again? We'll make sure that you're properly connected.
Yep, I've done that. The quality any different or better?
Okay, can
Or-
you speak a little bit so we can make sure with the interpreter that the sound quality is all right for interpretation, please?
Yes, if you can hear me now, any better than before or with sufficient quality at least? Is that okay or still not? Or should I speak slower? Would that make it easier? I think you have it in writing anyway, even though I was now trying to summarize all the first part. Is that not working? No? I can't hear you anymore now either. Before I could.
Bermejo, our apologies. We'll try to work on it on our end to make sure that that your remarks are translated properly.
Okay.
In the interim, I presume that the best route forward would be for us to go to Ms. Akello. Ms. Akello, if you're ready, we will hear from you for 5 minutes and then circle back to Dr. Bermejo. Are you good to go? Welcome, Member of Parliament Akello. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
I bring you greetings from Uganda, Mr. Chairman and your committee members. Like you rightly said, I'm Lucy Akello, a Member of Parliament from Uganda. Africa has a long history of colonization, just like Canada, of people, foreign governments, foreign-led organizations telling us what is good for us or what our priorities should be. I will speak from the context of an African woman, mother, and a legislator. I speak not just for myself, but for the constituents who have asked me to speak on their behalf about their priorities and concerns. Clear polling data show what I will tell you is overwhelming, in line with public opinion throughout Africa. I pray that my submission is as candid as you would like it to be. I'll speak first about abortion. Our people are still loyal to religious truths and cultures. Canada, too, has its beautiful cultures. It seems no matter how much money will be spent on making abortion look good, our people still see through the money, the marketing, and mass education. The women I represent are able to see through this. We believe life starts from conception. And where I come from, once conception takes place, it is life. And even when you get a miscarriage, that life is given a decent burial, irrespective of the sex. Africa generally finds abortion pregnant. A survey of 2014 by ASPO's Silvod, for example, found that 87% of Kenyans oppose the thought of killing an unborn child. This nationwide Kenyan survey echoed the findings of a 2013 global survey study by Pew Research Center that asked 40,117 respondents in 40 countries what their thought about various moral issues included abortion. The overwhelming majority of Africans said that abortion was morally unacceptable. 92% of Ghanaians, 88% of Ugandans, 82% of Kenyans, 80% of Nigerians, and 77% of Tunisians said they considered abortion to be morally wrong. Almost 80% of African countries have some sort of law prohibiting and restricting abortion. And it is predicted on a widely held belief that unborn babies have a right to live and deserve to be protected by law. With this relevant view of issue, abortion, most people are satisfied with these laws. There are hardly any locally organized complaints, demonstrations, or protests calling for legalization of abortion. On the contrary, there have been many pro-life rallies, marches, and conferences in various countries expressing the people's desire to the continued protection of the unborn. Globally, crisis pregnancy centers facilities are vilified as misinformation or disinformation centers. Post-abortion recovery programs for women who have been wounded by abortion or would like to find emotional and psychological healing are not common occurrence in Africa. The result is that the trauma they have suffered follows them because there's no one who tells them before they carry out the abortion. Family planning. To the woman I represent, the term family planning is synonymous to contraception. This is how it has been sold to them. When one says they are on family planning, they mean they are on contraception. But women are hurting from the side effects of hormonal contraception, and they talk about it with each other. Contraceptive side effects are a major deterrent to consistent use of contraception, and women who experience bleeding specific side effects are most likely to make a choice of contraceptive discontinuation and switching. On the issue of comprehensive sexuality education, the parents I represent see comprehensive sexuality education as assault to the health and innocence of children. Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, I recommend that the Canadian government and this parliament sees more into keeping the girl child at school as opposed to giving them contraceptives. Where I come from, there is a push to even put girls as young as 13, 14 on contraception. What does this do to a young girl? I also recommend that you respect Uganda as a sovereignty. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Akello. Have we sorted out the technical problem?
IT consultant will call in.
We'll call him. So what are you suggesting we do in the interim?
We can go to questions.
Should we go to questions? Are the members okay with that? To go to questions, and then once the previous witness is good to go, then we'll revert back to that. Okay, so for first round of questionings, we have Mr. Jennis. Mr. Jennis, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move forward with my first question here, but before that, I want to thank all of our witnesses. All of you have made an effort to be here, but in particular, Mrs. Akello flying all the way from Uganda to be with us in person. Sometimes we have public servants who don't want to come from their offices to be with us in person. And I look forward to the continuing discussion here. So I'm the Shadow Minister for International Development. Big concept in international development right now is the issue of localization, listening to and responding to the needs of local people and applying those without bringing in predetermined Western priorities. What are the development priorities of local women in Uganda who you represent, and how can we ensure that our development assistance relates to local priorities instead of bringing in predetermined Western priorities?
Thank you so much. I chose to fly here after 2 days of thinking, and I've just witnessed it here, that actually systems can fail, and I would have failed to represent the voice that would have told me to come here, and I think I've made the right choice. Just to go back now to your question, development priorities. For long, I worked with civil society before joining politics, and one thing that was so good at that time, when the donors would come to us, they would ask you, what are your values? What does your culture say about this, this, and this? And they will say, we will fit into your culture. But now things have changed. What is now happening is you must fit, the donors come and tell you, you must fit in our values, you must fit in our culture, which is really for me wrong, because if you want to help me, come build what I have, as opposed to making me fit in your priorities. Right now, like I said, our priority is to keep the girl at school. And when we keep the girl at school, study has shown that when a girl stays at school, she will definitely stay out of unwanted pregnancy, and we will not need abortion for her. We will not need contraceptive for her. That is, for me, the priority, the development priority that I think we need. We need more health centers, functional health centers for our women and our children, as opposed to more money for contraceptives and family planning and abortion.
Thank you, ma'am. In 2018, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau met with President Museveni, the president of Afghanistan. He was widely criticized at the time for not raising the issue of LGBTQ rights, in particular, given that your president has taken positions on that issue, and our party joined in that criticism of the Prime Minister at the time. And I just raise this because there are issues where people want to see us raise issues that reflect widely held opinions here, but those issues may differ from opinions or perceptions on the ground in our partners. So as it relates to the issue of abortion, how do you suggest we navigate those areas where there are sincerely held disagreements, deeply held but sincerely held disagreements between governments, between parliaments, between parliamentarians? How do we navigate those areas as it relates to abortion, family planning, in a way that is true to our convictions, but that is also sincere and respectful?
Thank you.
You have 20 seconds remaining for your
Okay.
response. Thank you.
My president has always said Uganda is a sovereign nation, just like Canada and just like any other country. So if we all respected our sovereignties, then we wouldn't have much problem. We have our laws here in Canada. We also have laws in Uganda. And those are the things that should get us going. Thank you.
Thank you. We next go for 4 minutes to Mr. Oliphant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just I'd like to take a moment of privilege to raise one name on the committee, and it's the name Bonnie Bean. Bonnie was a friend of mine, a parishioner of mine in the church where I was the pastor, who died on February 21st after a lifetime with Planned Parenthood in the Toronto office, after a lifetime of sexual education for young people, for advocating for women's rights, and was a profound influence on me all my life. And I just want to raise her name and get it in our record today as someone who has made a difference in our country, and her death is a loss to our community. And I wanted to raise Bonnie's name and also to thank Ms. Sully for your presentation, a very factual understanding, and also from Planned Parenthood, the witness that raised important issues. I am going to address some issues with respect to the Member of Parliament Kello's presentation today. With all due respect and fully understanding the sovereignty issue, the world community has decided that human rights are universal. They transcend political boundaries, they're indivisible, and they're interdependent. You yourself are co-chair of the Women's Caucus, I understand, in your parliament. Or you have been co-chair of the Women's Caucus with the Minister Sarah Opendi, and have worked on women's issues. I wanted to know how you address the human rights, the health and well-being of lesbians in your country.
Thank you. Just for the record, Honorable Sarah Opendi is the chair of the Uganda Women's Parliamentarians. I am nowhere in the executive. I am actually the vice chair of an accountability committee, PAC, and I sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee of Parliament. I'm just a member of the Uganda parliamentarians, women's parliamentarians. So I thought I needed to set this record very clear.
Sometimes the internet is wrong.
I thought now you're getting it from the right person, the reason why I needed to be here. Yes, you're right. Human rights are universal. But the UN declaration, the original one, if you go and look through how everything has changed, we now make definitions of what human rights are based on what now we want. Even today, I can wake up and decide to define human rights the way I want. If you look through the definition of human rights, it has changed over the period from the original definition of what we knew as human rights.
Well, I would still argue that they're universal and they transcend sovereignty borders. There is a bill called the Anti-Homosexuality Bill that is presented in your parliament. Are you supportive of that bill?
That bill came in Parliament. I'm yet to read it because when it came, I was away. And at the right time, I will make my decision because it is still very premature.
This bill allows for the extradition of gay people from other countries who are living their lives with protection of human rights in Canada. And it would allow for the extradition of them to be punished and serve up to 10 years for simply being a lesbian or being a gay man, a bisexual person. It also has definitions of homosexuality that are outdated and have no bearing in science, in religion, or in law. As a Christian pastor, it is an offensive bill, and I would hope that you read it very carefully to understand that it would isolate Uganda from the rest of the world. 22 countries in Africa are now moving towards full rights for lesbian and gay men, and I am wondering what your
Sorry, just a point of
caucus
order,
could do
Chair.
to do that.
Just a point of order. I share Mr. Oliphant's views on this particular bill. However, this is not on topic of the issue that we're here to raise. And it even in a person's time, there is an expectation that they stay on topic. I have been chastised for that from time to time in the past. So respect. This is an important issue. It's successfully chastised, as Ms. Bendayan points out. So just what's good for the goose is good for the gander, so to speak.
I had said unsuccessful.
The bill is very clear that it is limiting lesbians' rights and their health rights, their human rights, and our study is on sexual and reproductive health and rights of women globally. That includes the rights of lesbian women who are being discriminated against in this bill. My hope is the bill doesn't pass. My hope is that Uganda chooses to be with the world community to recognize human rights and certainly the rights of Ugandans who live outside of their country, who have the right to live under the laws of Canada and not face extradition.
So Ms. Akello, you have about approximately 20 seconds to respond.
Thank Thank you. I was invited here to talk about the topic of sexual and reproductive health for women globally. I have done that. If you want us to talk about the anti-homosexuality bill, we will talk about it when my sovereign nation of Uganda has made a decision on it. And rest assured, no one is going to be killed because every life matters.
Chair.
Clerk has asked for the floor just to do a sound check with.
So we will do a brief sound check with you, Dr. Albero, still, please.
Yeah.
Can you?
Is it any better? I can hear you well.
Thank you. Can you speak a little bit more, and we'll make sure that the interpreter can interpret simultaneously. Thank you.
Yes, and I'm so sorry not to be there face to face, which would have been much easier if I had been there with Elizabeth and with Lucy. So sorry
Perfect.
for that.
Perfect.
Yes.
Your sound is all right. Thank you, sir. You'll be able to answer question. Thank you.
Very much for that. Now we go to Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Bergeron, you have 4 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'd only like to say that during our discussion, I'll share my time with my colleague from Shefford. Good morning, ladies, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us today and enlightening us on your observations. And quite simply, Ms. Sully, you arose the issue in your presentation, but the witness testimony we've had today requires a little bit more explicit responses to the consequences involved when individuals don't have access to adequate conception means or abortion services in an accessible fashion. Can you clarify for us what measures your organization have taken to deal with the repercussions when individuals do not have adequate access to services or contraception?
As I understand it, you want to understand more what we're doing to address gaps in access to sexual and reproductive health services, and in particular, family planning. We're a research and policy organization, and all of our work is through partnership. So we are always following the lead of our country partners, whether they be researchers or advocates, in what they see as the priorities for evidence generation and policy and advocacy within their own countries. So we follow a country-led approach. I think what we see is the countries that have the highest rates of unintended pregnancy are often also those that restrict contraceptive access. Then they also have higher rates of abortion. That in the restriction of abortion, those often come hand in hand with lack of access to family planning services and making them available so people can prevent that pregnancy. I think one thing I wanted to touch on is that it's not just access alone. I thought Lucy Akello touched on an important point around contraceptive side effects, that we see that women report that as one of their reasons for not using methods of contraception. It's access, it's the methods that are available to them. They always need to have free and informed choice of a range of methods that are available at a place nearby them in their community. That should always be how we put forward contraceptive programming. And so I think we often interpret the gaps as just about access. Access is a huge part of it. Financing is a huge part of it. But it's also about information. And that's where comprehensive sexuality education comes in, that people need to understand what is available to them and what those services are. And so I think there's a range of steps that we need to take. I think where Canada can step in is in the financing side and in supporting advocates that are really pushing within their countries to expand access to services to ensure that there is comprehensive sexuality education, that the full comprehensive package of services is being provided.
Merci.
Thank you. As you know, an agreement was signed between our government and the Tigray area of Ethiopia. According to some of the reports that we've heard on the BBC, sexual assaults on women continue in Ethiopia, particularly in the Tigray area. Do you have any information as to the situation currently in Tigray?
We don't have great data because where there are humanitarian emergencies and fragile context, it is the hardest to collect data. We were actually, over the period in which the most recent conflict erupted in Tigray, collecting data in Ethiopia, a national study, and we were not able to get evidence from the Tigray region to understand what was happening, both in terms of provision of SRH services and health facilities, or in women's needs and use of contraceptive methods and other SRH services at that time. But I think we know broadly that during humanitarian emergencies, the SRH needs are greatest, that SRH services should be part of primary care, but they are often forgotten and not included as part of the humanitarian response. And yet, the needs are greater because there's high levels of sexual violence. We know that is the case, that people have their access to health facilities and to services interrupted. And so we need to be including SRH services as part of the humanitarian response. The Interagency Working Group on Reproductive Health in Crises has put forward a minimum initial service package that really lays out how to, in that moment of responding in a humanitarian emergency, put forward a full package of SRH services to meet those needs. And so I think that we need to stop neglecting this as part of a humanitarian response in Tigray as well as in other conflicts and fragile contexts.
Merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Bergeron. We now go to Ms. Pearson. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony to the witnesses. Mr. Alvaro Bermeo, it's nice to see you. I had the opportunity to meet with you last summer, and so I'm sad that we weren't able to hear your testimony. So I'm just curious if you would be able to send the testimony that you had planned to the analysts so that they had that to add into the report that we'll be preparing at this committee. And I wanted to start actually with a question for Ms. Sully, if I could. You know, I just got back from being. We spoke to our SRHR experts in Poland, which is one of the countries that has very restrictive access for women to SRHR. There has been a massive movement within the community to push back on that, which I think we all can be very, very proud of. But what I'd like to hear from you is, you know, as we see more and more countries liberalizing their abortion laws over the past few decades, what factors have been driving this change from your perspective?
Thank you. Yeah, I mentioned that there have been 60 countries that have liberalized their laws to some extent or another since the ICPD conference in 1994. Talking about the African context, I think there, you know, the Maputo Protocol was signed in 2003, and Article 14.2c lays out the legal grounds in which the African Union member states have agreed that they want abortion to be accessible within the African Union. We've seen 21 countries in the region liberalize their laws to some extent to meet the Maputo Protocol. 7 of those countries going beyond the conditions outlined within that protocol. And so there we're looking at African country-led efforts to protect lives and expand rights and reduce the maternal mortality crisis that is happening across sub-Saharan Africa. And often within countries, those efforts are being led by politicians, by clinicians, by bureaucrats who understand the health consequences of unsafe abortion. The latest law to pass in Benin, it was 2 members of parliament who were OBGYNs who saw firsthand the consequences of unsafe abortion. So where we're seeing the laws change, it is people who understand on the ground the reality. Sometimes it is against their own moral beliefs, but it is what they think should be policy and law because they understand what the implications of limiting access to abortion is.
Thank you. And I guess that's one of the questions I wanted to just get some clarity from you on, because you talked about the fact that putting legislation in place doesn't reduce abortion. It reduces safe abortion. And disproportionately, the people that are impacted by that tend to be poor. They tend to be from racialized communities. It impacts different people differently. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see that in the United States, where I live right now as a Canadian. I live in the United States, and abortion restrictions there. We see that who it harms the most are those who don't have the means to travel and go and pay for services and access them in other places. That happens internationally. People find access to safe abortion services if they have the means and the resources to do so. It is poor women who are struggling to meet their service needs who are most impacted by these laws. And I think that it's often, when you look at who it is that's having abortions, often these are married women, mothers who have children who cannot afford to have additional children in their houses. There are a lot of reasons why people have abortions, and I think that it's those who are struggling the most, who need the access to these services, that have the hardest time reaching them.
I have very little time, but could you talk a little bit about the impacts on school-age women and girls that are not able to access reproductive rights and healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, often they are forced to leave school, that when they become pregnant, they can't remain in school. And often adolescents, they may not have control over if and when they have sex. And I think that's just a reality. And contraceptive methods fail. They work great. A lot of them work very well, but they all fail at some point or another. And so we need a second line of defense, and that's safe abortion. We did a study in Uganda among adolescent girls, and we found that sexually active adolescent girls had the highest rate of abortion, as well as abortion complications. So they're showing up in health facilities, and this is impacting their long-term health.
Thank you very much for that testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Sully. We now move to the second round, and the first question goes to Mr. Jennis. Mr. Jennis, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come back to Mrs. Akello, and I do wish the committee had given you more time in general, but I'm grateful again for you being here. I want to follow up on the issue of sovereignty and ask you about the violation of local laws. My view is that if the Government of Canada is involved in supporting activities that are illegal in the country where they're happening, that they should at least be transparent about that fact, and then we can have the conversation as a country about whether that's something we want to do. In African countries, are you seeing abortions being performed that violate local laws with the facilitation of international NGOs or foreign governments? And could you share information that you have about that, please?
Thank you. The fact that we haven't legalized abortion in Uganda doesn't mean that it's not going on, and it's going on even under the watch of most of these big organizations. I want to just give an example. We have a facility called Maristop. They hide in the name of doing family planning, but at the end of the day, they're actually doing what they call safe abortions. We have Reproductive Health Uganda, which is directly linked to International Planned Parenthood. They are actually doing a lot of this. I remember last year I raised a question in Parliament regarding the involvement of Reproductive Health Uganda in actually teaching our children as young as 9 and 10 years that it is actually okay to do abortion as a way of family planning, and then also secondly, a family planning method like tubercle litigation. What would a child as young as 10 years be learning about and knowing or appreciating to use the family planning of tubercle litigation?
Mm-hmm. Just because of the time constraints, I want to make sure that the committee has heard what you said precisely. Are you saying that Marie Stopes and International Planned Parenthood Foundation are, in your view, involved in performing abortions that are violating local laws in Uganda?
Yes, Maristop, yes, and Reproductive Health Uganda, which works directly with these organizations.
Okay, thank you. And is that sort of widely known? Is that widely discussed? What is the local government's kind of response to that? And what should our response be, given that Canada's government has funded both of these organizations?
Actually, it's widely known. Everybody knows this fact for a fact, but what they cannot come out to do because they hide in the name of providing family planning services to the people. So that's why in countries like Kenya, Maristop, there was actually a demonstration for Maristop to be closed down because of that.
Yeah. I'll happily take more if it's available.
No, it's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Move on. Next, we go to Dr. Fry. Dr. Fry, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to thank everyone, and I'm so sorry, Mr. Bermejo, that we couldn't hear you, because I think this is such an important issue. I think that Rob Oliphant earlier on pointed out that you cannot pick and choose what are human rights. some human beings are not more important than others. No human beings are more equal than others. And so human rights is about a universal issue. Now, so I just wanted to say that because I feel strongly about that. I think one of the questions I wanted to ask was to the Guttmacher people is tell me about what happens. Do you have data that tells us what happens when a young person in a conflict situation is raped, because rape is now a tactic of war, and they cannot have access to abortion? What happens to that young person? What do they do? How can they cope with that? And is there any way, like we see it happening in Ukraine right now, when you go into Poland and you go into Hungary, they don't have access to abortion. That's the first question I have. The second question is, if you don't have access to legal abortion, you're going to have to go and get illegal abortion. That has been done since the dawn of history. And we know that that causes extreme illness. Many of the reproductive organs of young people are harmed because they have unsafe abortions, and many of them die from unsafe abortions around the world. So my question to you is this. Everyone seems to want to be focused on abortion. Well, I would like to make sure that that's not all we're focused on, but the point is, what happens to people when they're stuck in a conflict situation or in areas where they're pregnant and don't want to be, and they're very young? What happens to them if they have no access to legal abortion?
Thank you for those questions. I have to admit that our data is not great on fragile contexts to begin with, let alone on adolescent girls in those settings. And that's something where we need to be investing more data and more funding in generating evidence to really understand those needs. What we do know is when adolescents and all women in these contexts have unintended pregnancies and they are unable to access safe abortion services, and they go and they have unsafe abortions, they are having the least safe abortions. Sort of unsafe abortions is a very broad category, but there are extremely dangerous unsafe abortions that are part of that category. When we've done research in refugee camps and in humanitarian settings, we've seen that those in those camps have worse and more severe complications from unsafe abortions compared to people in the surrounding communities. They aren't even able to access the same services as those in the same geographic areas as them. So they're having more severe complications from unsafe abortions, and that's impacting their long-term health.
Thank you. One quick question that I wanted to ask. Access to contraception, we know that about about 400,000 women in Uganda between 15 and 49 do not have access to contraception. We've heard that's because there are side effects. What type of contraception? Here, women in other parts of the world take birth control pills. They have other forms. We know the IUDs can be unsafe and can cause problems. But why is it that there is no access to safe abortion in some of these countries? What is the problem here, and what can we do to fix it?
Over your time frame, if we could just provide her 20 seconds to respond.
Yeah, I would say side effects are a very small piece and are not the most common one for adolescents. Adolescence is often a question of access. It's providers that are biased and unwilling to provide those services to give them the full range of options that are available. It's discrimination, it's stigma, it is a range of factors that adolescents in particular face when trying to access services for contraception in particular.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sully. We now go to MP LaRouche. You have a minute and a half.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll try to be as quickly as possible. We are on the International Day for Women and their reproductive rights. We will continue to protect their rights. So quickly, Dr. Bermeo, knowing that conflicts will continue around the world and these rights are exacerbated, obviously, in combat zones. Why, when we arrive with humanitarian aid, do we not treat this in a priority fashion?
You can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that question. And I'll speak not just as IPPF, but having spent 10 years as part of the humanitarian system, and for the last 5 as health director of the International Federation of the Red Cross. And I would argue that the main reason that happens is because our feminist foreign policy and our approach does not cover the humanitarian assistance and our humanitarian response. The humanitarian response remains, probably after the oil industry, the most macho industry that I've ever worked in. So people come back from missions and say, well, I've just been in Yemen or in Afghanistan or in Iran or wherever, and women didn't come to me to talk about their reproductive health needs. And I always say, no, women didn't come to you, full stop. And certainly if they came, they wouldn't have talked to you about their reproductive health needs. So I think it's got something to do with how the system works. And I think we saw in Ukraine very clearly, for everybody who wanted to see it, the massive impact of the conflict on women's rights and their bodily autonomy. And that wasn't just about the use of rape as a form of war, which of course is there, but also women who were pregnant and their husband was going to war, who now didn't want to continue with that pregnancy, or many other things. People continue to have sex during wars as well. So there is no doubt in our mind, and there shouldn't be doubt in anybody's mind, that sexual and reproductive health services are life-saving services that need to be provided in a conflict situation. And I say this also responding to another of the questions. As an organization that has 40,000 clinics and service delivery points, including on the Sudan-Ethiopia border, and I was there just a week before in the refugee camps, before the peace settlement was signed, you saw an incredible amount of sexual and reproductive health violence there. And you saw it there. And at
Dr.
the same
Bermejo,
time,
you're considerably over time.
Sorry.
Thank you ever so much.
Chance to say something.
Absolutely, for sure. So for the final minute and a half, we will go to MP McPherson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It wasn't your last time to speak, Mr. Bermeo. I have some questions for you. My concern is always around access to SRHR for women. And of course, one of the things that I'm quite proud of is that one of the provinces in Canada just recently made contraception free, contraception products free for all the people living in that province. And I know when I spoke with you, we spoke a little bit about pharmaceutical abortion and how that has made access easier and made it easier for women to access the healthcare that they require. Could you talk a little bit about that, a little bit about access, and a little bit about how much we have to lose if we don't get this right in Canada and around the world?
Thank you so much for that question. Medical abortion or pharmaceutical abortion, as you're calling it, is increasing everywhere as the preferred method for many, many women, even though we still have to keep traditional methods available as well. That is because it responds to two things. I think it's a good response to the operational challenge of making increasing access to safe abortion in countries where it's difficult. But it's also a response to the political challenge, the global opposition that is making access more and more difficult in clinics, either by picketing the clinics and embarrassing women and discriminating them when they try to access those abortions, or by threatening the provider. So medical abortion, in a way, provides a response to both those situations, and thus, I would argue, is a very important tool in our toolbox to guarantee access to safe abortion to the women and pregnant people that need it.
Thanks very much.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
The gentleman from Planned Parenthood made some very critical comments about the oil industry. I just wonder if he can clarify if those comments were his own opinion or on behalf of his organization.
We're out of time, Mr. Jennis. At this particular point, I'd like to thank Ms. Sully, thank Ms. Akello, and thank Dr. Bermeo. Terribly sorry for the technical challenges. We will ensure that your remarks are translated into French and they are distributed to all of the members. Thank you very, very much to all three of you for your perspective and your expertise. We will suspend for approximately 3-4 minutes so we can go to the next panel. For all those who are online, you can remain on your current link. You don't have to go out and come back in again. Yes.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Would it be possible to extend the meeting given that we are past 12:20?
By 10 minutes, maybe?
Thank you.
Thank you. Because we have 2 witnesses now. Yeah. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, June 20th, 2022, the committee resumes its study of the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women globally. It is now my pleasure to welcome to the committee three witnesses. First, we have Ms. Christina Kaspura, who is with the Foundation for Women and Family Planning. Great to welcome you. Second, we have Ms. Julie Thoreau-Sigan, who is with the Center for International Studies and Cooperation. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Teresa Okafor with the Foundation for African Cultural Heritage. Welcome to all three of you. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses who are joining us by video conference today. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. You should be clicking on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please do mute yourselves when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom is at the bottom of your screen, and you have a choice of either floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder to all three witnesses that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Now, you will each be provided 5 minutes. After your 5 minutes are over, after the 5 minutes for all three are over, we will then go to the members for questions. And should I put this sign up, that means you should be wrapping up either your comments or your response to questions within 30 seconds. So first, we will go to Ms. Kaspura. You have 5 minutes, and the floor is currently yours. Oh, no. We can't hear you?
She is on mute.
She is on mute, yeah. We can't.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry.
Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Yes, I represent Foundation for Women and Family Planning, which is the very first Polish NGO leading in the process of advancement of sexual and reproductive health and rights in Poland. It was established in 1991. Since then, we have been monitoring the implementation of the law and advocating for the liberalization and decriminalization of abortion. Since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, FAAE, this is the shortage of our organization, provides help in access to SRHR issues for women and girls from Ukraine. Moreover, we take part in various advocacy advocate initiatives along with the international NGOs and partners ensuring SRHR and GBV response to the refugees. The very purpose of FAAE creation was the existence and counterbalance of the consequences of Polish women's gradual loss of autonomy in terms of access to legal abortion care. For almost 30 years, the law was allowing access to abortion under 3 minimum grounds, as stipulated in the Act of January 1993 on family planning: human embryo protection and conditions of legal pregnancy termination. In October 2020, things got worse by means of political constitutional tribunal's ruling. The constitutional tribunal found that certain provisions of the act that provide for the legality of women's access to abortion care are unconstitutional, specifically on fetal abnormalities ground. The tribunal decision came into effect in January 2021. It was severely rolled back the already severely limited protection for women's access to legal abortion in Poland and resulted in a near total ban of abortion. Apart from almost no access to legal abortion, there is a limited access to contraception, especially emergency contraception. Polish teenagers suffer lack of comprehensive sexuality education. We cannot look at what is happening in Poland as regards SRHR backsliding without considering that the impact of transnational anti-gender movement, which is quite powerful in Poland and operates in synergy with the current ultra-conservative government. The regressive ruling, in contrary to Poland's obligations under international human rights treaties and the European Convention of Human Rights. As a state party to 7 international human rights treaties, Poland is obliged to ensure abortion is legal at a minimum when a woman's life or health is at risk when the pregnancy involves a severe or fetal impairment, or where the pregnancy results from the sexual assault. Furthermore, by removing a pre-existing legal entitlement to access abortion, Poland acted contrary to the international law principles of non-retrogression, which prohibit states from taking steps that undermine, restrict, to remove existing rights or entitlements. Moreover, the ruling prevents Poland from complying with the above-mentioned judgments from the European Court of Human Rights, and such further undermines respect for the rule of law. The regressive legal change has exposed women's health and lives to serious harm by forcing them to carry pregnancies to term against their will, forcing them to travel to other European countries to obtain safe and legal abortion care, forcing them to seek clandestine abortion care outside of the scope of the law in Poland. The city's ruling has fatal consequences. Women die as a result of this ruling, and its chilling effect on doctors who are afraid of activities that could be qualified as abortion. They wait too long to induce stillbirth. They procrastinate to remove that fetus on time. They hesitate to remove ectopic pregnancy. Here their names. Justyna died in December 2020. Isabella, Anna from Świdnica, and Dominika died in 2021. Agnieszka and Marta both have died in 2022. The ruling has significantly decreased access to antenatal tests. We hear from women contacted Federa that the doctors don't refer for antenatal testing or don't provide sufficient explanation of the results. There are more children born with severe and fatal defects who die shortly after death. There is almost non-institutional support for families who decide to take care of an ill child. Federa and other women's rights organizations organized to provide information on the access to medical abortion, abortion abroad, and in some narrow cases in
Ms.
Polish.
Kaspora, if I could ask you to conclude your remarks in the next 20 seconds or so.
Okay. So it will be my last remark. So obviously, abortion do happen. The very restrictive law didn't stop women to do abortion, but the process to get it might be burdensome, costly, and generating distress. This is also the kind of reproductive injustice, because especially this law beats into the poorest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kaspura. We next go to Ms. Thoreau Sagan. You similarly have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to meet with you today. And I'd like to come and talk to you on behalf of the Center for International Studies and Cooperation, with its headquarters in Montreal. Since 1958, it's been working in over 15 countries around the world: Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, particularly Haiti, and in Asia. CECI's mission is to combat poverty, exclusion, and inequality, notably through programs that strengthen the economic development capacities of disadvantaged communities, women in particular, supply initiatives to gender equality, and fight violence, food security, resilience. CECI has been implementing sexual and reproductive health projects for over 35 years, including support for strengthening mothers and children and the improvement of their services, the reduction of violence against women and children. Over the past few years, these projects have been carried out principally in Haiti, Mali, Rwanda, DRC, and Burundi. We note that currently there's been some backsliding on the rights. Some of these are, there's some themes that seem to be prevalent in a number of countries in the world. I'll only mention 4 for the time being. Reduction in support, financial support, be it public, be it international, for reproductive health. Complete sexual education, for example, has been reduced in its support and very difficult to access in rural areas. The decentralization will affect those in conflict areas in particular. Loss of the capacity in telecommunications is fairly rare. What we see, though, as a second element, is the rise of the backlash against women, anti-gender, globally speaking, much hostility towards gender identity, complete sexual identity, and rights, sexual and reproductive rights, particularly for the most marginalized populations. On the final two issues or points I'd like to mention, the lack of equalization that we have between the requirements and the training. In countries where abortion is forbidden or banned, there is lack of knowledge in medical staff and personnel as to the negative effects of post-abortion and post-birth. They don't understand what kind of problems that women will encounter. And then the persistence on sex-based, gender-based violence and aggressions. Not much to do to help victims after the fact. This has reduced the number of women who will, in fact, even seek assistance because they are not sure of what they're going to get as a reception. Some of the panelists have mentioned and had mentioned it first, but WHO every year said 13% of maternal deaths are attributable to insecure births. And restrictions in access to abortions has not reduced the number of abortions, but the quality and the safety of these abortions. On the basis of this experience, best practices that will come from our project, FAAE recommends to Canada and the government a number of things, but to increase, first of all, financing for the support of SRHR and concentrating on the recognition and the Canadian experience in this field, particularly NGOs and universities that work internationally and their support for the population everywhere in the world. Government should be supporting initiatives that will harmonize the activity of our various civil society partners, particularly the most marginalized. Also, to support organizations, CSOs in general, the localization of assistance, if you will. This should occur in cooperation with women's organizations who can, in fact, then contact and get in touch with allies in the public health field. We want to encourage, they must encourage victims of sexual aggression to come forward and seek help. A third element, support of new technologies and approach which would offer better service access in remote or isolated areas. And then, of course, the development of proper training programs in universities and colleges to deal with these things. Treat abortion as a public health issue, not as a disease, and to have proper combination and accompaniment to these individuals. Last recommendation on the impact that it would have in Canada here, policy-wise, Canada should encourage, directly or indirectly, unilaterally, bilaterally, or multilaterally, the leadership in some of these countries to perhaps legislate and regulate a little bit better. 20 years ago,
over time. Could I ask that you wrap up your comments in the next 20 seconds, please?
Sure, I do. Donc,
Okay, in closing then, to support through legislative activity and perhaps a periodic examination of the respect for international law and the various declarations of the United Nations in matters of SRHR. Thank you very much.
Again, we now go to Ms. Okafor. You similarly have 5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege for me to address you on this motion, calling on the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs to undertake a comprehensive study on sexual and reproductive health and rights of women globally. Mr. Chair, these rights in question do not represent the government nor the citizens of African countries, except for 4 countries. It is pressure groups pursuing special interests without being mindful of the impact it can have. As one who has represented my government as a delegate of the United Nations New York for 4 years, and one who has worked closely with the African group, we have been deeply concerned by the paternalism that interferes in another person's affairs cohesively or through incentives motivated by claims that the person will be better off. This handout approach, Mr. Chair, is what continues to perpetuate beggary, hunger, illnesses, oppression, and modern-day slavery in Africa. Support for the African woman should not be one which strips her of a right to family stability, a right to raise her intellectual tone and moral compass, a right to economic empowerment and social inclusivity, aka equity and proper health care. These rights are largely ignored and substituted with unsolicited rights to abortion, safe abortion, whatever that means, contraception, comprehensive sexuality education, to mention a few. I am aware that Canada has committed to increase funding to an average of 1.4 billion per year by 2023-2024. Canada has also committed to maintain this level of funding until 2030. Of this total funding, 700 million is to promote global sexual and reproductive health and rights, which includes contraception, abortion, comprehensive sexuality and reproductive health and rights, which includes contraception, abortion, and contraceptive sexuality education. I was shocked and scandalized by the language used by members of the committee, representatives of the Global Affairs Canada, and other witnesses who have demonstrated an imperialistic approach to helping underdeveloped nations. Advocacy to liberalize laws in countries that oppose abortion amounts to undermining the legislative and democratic process of sovereign states and to subvert deep values of good cultural traditions of these nations. It is increasingly clear that foreign funding and the international feminist assistive policy is becoming less about aid, empowerment, healthcare, and poverty reduction, and more about ideological colonization. If this is about rights, Mr. Chair, then I'm wondering if any government has a right to impose its belief on abortion on other nation who continues to reject it. Majority of African countries continue to protect life in all its stages and prefer to prioritize genuine health care that achieve best outcomes for women, mothers, their children, families. And I sincerely hope we can all agree that these are the priorities we should be focusing on. By way of conclusion, please note the following 4 points. There is no international right to abortion and comprehensive sexuality education, which is a key component of SRHR, because too many United Nations member states are strongly opposed to establishing such rights. On the contrary, United Nations consensus language indicates that member states have agreed to help women avoid abortion. Even the United Nations agency are prohibited from promoting abortion as a method of family planning. In Africa, the reproductive health care is maternal health care. It's suicidal to import practices and lifestyles that are alien to Africa. In 1994, the International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD outcomes document, instructed that governments should take appropriate steps to help women avoid abortion, which in no case should be promoted as a method of family planning. Let me say, with your permission, Mr. Chair, that I am aware that many African countries are overflowing with condoms and contraceptions from the West sent to us to fulfill a fictitious unmet need for contraception. when what we really need is water, food, housing, employment, quality education that can break the intergenerational cycle of poverty, and employability that can make education an equal playing field, regardless of the circumstances surrounding one's birth. The true unmet need are in the maternal health care provision, which sets up blood banks to provide blood to prevent death caused by bleeding, which contributes a whopping 33.9% to maternal mortality. Another unmet need.
Ms. Okafor, you're considerably over your allotted time.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
Point of order, Chair. I've been timing the witnesses, and you allowed Ms. Kakpura to go to 6 minutes and 15 seconds. You just told the current speaking witness that she's considerably over her time at the 5:01 mark.
No,
I think given
6:01
the
according to my...
Mr. Chair, I think given that there are different views being expressed, you should ensure that witnesses with different perspectives on this topic are afforded equal time to present those perspectives.
You can rest
rather
assured,
than
Mr.
cutting
Jennings,
off
that
a
that
witness
will be
who
the
has
case.
a
You
different
can rest assured
perspective
of that.
early.
You can rest assured of that, Mr. Jennings.
Not so sure.
Excuse me? You're not so sure, or
not so sure?
Mr. Chair, may I be allowed to conclude?
Yes, you can conclude, but if I could ask that you conclude it in the next 20 to 30 seconds, please, so we have some time left for questions. Thank you.
Another unmet need is the hygienic, better environment to prevent infection, which contributes 9.7% to the deaths in Africa. Africa needs emergency obstetric care, adequate nutrition to manage eclampsia, obstructed labor, anemia. The overflow of condoms and contraception are evidence of sexual and social-cultural colonialism. Many Africans are aware that sexual and reproductive health and rights is a proverbial cockroach in the ice cream of aid in kind to Africa. Can there be a shift from a deficit model that thinks that Africa exists because problems exist to a model that conceptualizes the African woman as a person and a protagonist in their story of development, and one that has the moral capacity to change their lives with the choices they make? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Okafor. We now go to questions from the members. The first question goes to Ms. Shelby Cramp-Newman. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging and thanking all of our witnesses for not being with us in person, but being with us virtual. Championing the cause of sexual and reproductive health and the rights of women is definitely imperative, and the importance of welcoming the ideas and ensuring that the rights and voices are respected is extremely critical. I'd like to start by suggesting that in sub-Saharan Africa, many adolescents lack knowledge about menstruation and sexually transmitted diseases. To best educate our adolescents on sexual reproductive health is key, and I understand that HIV is widespread. There's a widespread knowledge of HIV, but knowledge of others with regards more specifically to the menstruation and sexually transmitted infections is not. So in order to gain insight on how we can best help these adolescents make informed decisions to lead to more positive experiences and to protect them from risk, I would understand that education is the key. So my first question I would like to pose towards Ms. Okafor. Our previous witness mentioned that a focus on clinics and education is the best use of external dollars. In your view, could you speak to how we can best fund reproductive health rights of women through healthcare and education funding? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'll reiterate the point that I made, that the most important healthcare we need is healthcare that can prevent maternal mortality. And the kind of education our youths need is education in value, education that can cultivate human values, moral values that can lift the intellectual tone of society. We don't want imported values that actually prioritizes sexuality in our continent. Our continent can only be uplifted from poverty when priority is given to the areas that needs to be prioritized. And these areas have to do with employability, employment for the labor market that is saturated with young people looking for jobs. We need information on how to make education an equal playing field for everyone, regardless of their circumstances of birth. We need what can help mothers and children, who are key and central to everything that takes a nation to develop. They're the building blocks of a nation. We need what can help them develop, and not necessarily prioritizing sex all the time, because I see that there is an obsession to sexualize our continent, and that is the problem that we're having at the United Nations, when arguments should be focused on good governance, on employability, on quality education, on food, on water, on clean water, on nutrition, adequate nutrition. It's often derailed and sidetracked by other discussions that are undermining the continent. Thank you.
Thank you. We next go to MP Bendayan for 3 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. My first question is addressed to Ms. Seguin, and I'd like to thank you, first of all, for your work and your organization's work, working out of Montreal. I don't have too much time, so I'll pass to something that others have mentioned. Restrictions will not reduce the quantum of abortions. Do you have any statistics you can share with us to either in writing or right now, if you will, to comment on that statement? Madame Seguin? Well, yes. Well, the statistics that I can offer you or have offered you come from the WHO, the World Health Organization. They're available to everyone. And they do indicate that on a global scale, unsafe abortions represent 8% of maternal death. And some areas, of course, have higher rates than others. And I can share some details of that if you wish. Yes, but specifically, restrictions on access to abortion does not reduce the number of abortions. If you could give us some supporting information on that. Well, no. Well, the restrictions won't give you the number of abortions, and they don't reduce them, but they do reduce the safety factor of women that do have abortions. Thank you very much, Madame Seke. Madame Kaspura.
Address a question to you as well with the time I have remaining. Do you believe that women's sexual and reproductive rights, including the right to abortion, are human rights? Ms. Kaspura?
Yes, thank you for this question. Of course, we strongly believe that these are basic human rights.
And you spent some time detailing the 2020 Constitutional Tribunal ruling in Poland and described it as effectively creating a near total ban on legal abortions in Poland. You also mentioned that women die as a result of this ruling. I wonder if you could perhaps expand a little bit on the principle of non-retrogression, which you also mentioned in your introduction. In its purest form, I understand this principle to mean that a government
Ms.
may
Bendayan, you're over your time. If we could just provide her with 20 or 30 seconds to respond.
Perhaps on the principle of non-retrogression, Ms. Kaspura?
Difficult to say that this is the retrogression, because we have this restrictive law. This law has been lasting for over 30 years. So we manage somehow, and yearly we have Poland over 120,000 abortions, mostly made at home with pills, and some of them are made in our neighboring countries in the EU. We are the country, democratic country, of course, in the center of Europe. So it's not difficult to get access to safe abortion services, but you have to know language, you have to live in a big city, you have the access to internet, you have money for this.
Thank
Right
you, Ms.
now-
Kaspura. I'm sorry, you're considerably out of time. We next go to Madame Larouche. You have 3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the witnesses for appearing today, and I'd like to repeat the comment because it's really striking. Tomorrow is the International Day for Women. Now, I think that most of the witnesses have indicated quite clearly that there's been a lot of backsliding in the protection of the SRHR for women in the world. And we can't just stand by idly to watch this backsliding. We have to continue to progress and go forward to improve and protect these rights, especially as tomorrow is the 8th of March. Madame Roussiguin, I'd like to begin with you, and I'd like to join the opinion of my predecessor, and I want to thank you for the work that you've been doing in the matter of SRHR. Now, there was an announcement made, and as of 2022, the government would have assistance to the health of women and girls throughout the world of $1.4 billion over the period going to 2030 to improve sexual health and reproductive rights. Is that adequate, do you think, to support? What do you think that the adequate financing would be for such project? Well, insofar as investment in the protection of these rights, we had the International Cooperation Week last week, which demonstrates that financial support for international development and support is not really meeting even our minimum standards. It's 0.2% of GDP, I think. And we should be able to go up to $10 billion as of 2025 for all humanitarian aid, official assistance, not only just SRHR. But, of course, sexual and reproductive health and its protection are important and are part of that. Comprehensive sexual education, for example, must be included.
Rapidement.
Quite quickly, unsafe abortions, 97% are in more impoverished countries, and this represents a very significant cause of mortality, mothers' mortality in the world. It is a public health issue. Canada has a feminist agenda, apparently. How can we better influence support for the continuation of protection of rights throughout the world? Well, we have to work in the nexus of the community, the health services, university programming and curricula, and on the very basis of a rights-based approach. I indicated that in Mali, for example, they adopted legislation 10, 15 years ago, but they've not given any follow-up on it. They are slow to act. Civil society will not have the actual financial resources to take a position or to engender a dialogue on the issues. So it's important to maintain an ongoing dialogue based on fact, not on the imposition of a perception of a cultural approach or the fact that abortion is prohibited endangers the health of women and girls. Thank you.
For the last question for 3 minutes to MP McPherson.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the witnesses for the testimony today. It's very, very important. I'd like to start with Ms. Kapura. Thank you, Ms. Kapura, for being with us today. I know you were generous with your time when the subcommittee was, the Foreign Affairs Committee was in Poland, and you talked to us about the impact on Ukrainians fleeing violence, the impacts for women and girls fleeing violence in their country. And you told some pretty horrific stories about what some of these women have to go through and how they have no access to SRHR, to reproductive health supports. I'm wondering if you could share that with the entire committee.
Thank you. Thank you for this question. From the very beginning of the war, we were sure that FAAE has to help and assist Ukrainian refugees, women and girls, because our government will not provide them with access to reproductive health services. So we established a hotline for women in Ukrainian language with Ukrainian gynecologists on duty. We printed special brochures, guides for them. And especially we helped at the very beginning of the war many young, and not only young, girls and women who were raped. It's very difficult to get testimony on rapes because they didn't want to speak about this. They just want to forget as soon as possible. During the conversations, which I provided many times, at the end of the conversation, she said to me, I was raped by 4. And after 4th man, I don't remember because I failed. And the first thing I would like just to keep a secret, top secret. This is only my problem and my issue. Just help me only to take this out of me. Help me in access with abortion because I discovered that I am pregnant. This is a 8th week of pregnancy. Of course, we help them. This is very difficult to identify testimonies of rapes and women who are raped because they just want to get access to abortion services. They don't want to speak. They don't want to be listened to go to the prosecutor and to police. In Poland, abortion in pregnancies resulted from rape is still illegal, but the procedure is very complicated. So we did many advocacy efforts to our government Ministry of Health just to treat these kinds of abortion for raped women on a special way, on a special procedure, because this is the war crime. And we also appeal to the European Union, to the Parliament, just to treat this in a special way. Don't ask women about names, about the event, because they don't want to speak about this. They are afraid that somebody else could know that she was raped. One of these women just said me that, could you imagine my life after the war? Could you imagine my husband and my family if he knows that I was raped by several Russian soldiers, the greatest enemy, he will not touch me. I will not be his wife any longer. So it's not easy.
Thank you, Ms. Kaspura.
Thank you very much.
Did the members want to have one more round of 2 minutes? Or yes? Okay. So we go to the next round. First, Mr. Jedis, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about illegal abortions. I wanted to ask Dr. Akafor, are foreign governments and international organizations involved in performing or supporting illegal abortions in African countries? Who is funding them? Help us understand the dynamics on that, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. Unfortunately, foreign governments have been supporting abortion in African states where abortion is illegal. And this is intrusive, to be honest with you, because it does not protect the mental health of such women, because post-abortion syndrome is real. And it's also intrusive in the sense that it goes against the perennial values of African countries.
Thank you, ma'am. Just because of time constraints, I wonder if you could name specific organizations that you're aware of, specific governments that are funding it. Any of those details in the 45 seconds or so I have left would be very helpful.
Thank you so much. International Planned Parenthood.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, did you have more to add, or?
International Planned Parenthood, and I can also add International Feminist Assistive Policy is behind most of it. Global Affairs Canada.
Thank you. Could you provide further information on that in writing, please? Any additional evidence or names could be provided in writing to the committee after the fact, please. Some legislatures in Africa have far greater representation of women than our own legislature here in Canada. What are you hearing from African women specifically on these issues?
African women are crying out and saying that we need to prioritize what really matters in the country. And what really matters to African women is economic empowerment and social inclusion, equity, because there's a lot of inequalities. COVID in particular has brought on a disproportionate burden on African women. And we're talking about war in Ukraine, but in many African countries, we also have refugee camps. And their priority in these refugee camps is employability, skills training, IT training, digital literacy, bridging the digital divide, and not about prioritizing sex, because it's not of any benefit to the country. We have our ways of taking care of moral values, and family stability is important to Africa because family is a safety net in Africa. And so thank you for this platform that lends me a voice to say what we really need in Africa.
I was cut off at exactly 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Okafor. We next go to Mr. Zuberi. You have 2 minutes, Mr. Zuberi.
I'll give my time to my colleague, Dr. Fry.
Dr. Fry, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zuberi. I appreciate it. I just wanted to ask a question of Ms. Kapura. I am very well aware of what is happening in Ukraine. We've heard when we studied what is going on in Ukraine about the number of rapes. We also know that these women are, as you so movingly told us, really need access to abortion. And of course, if you are a refugee, let's imagine in your country, Poland, what happens? You can't just, as a refugee, move from Poland to another European country to get access. So what is happening? Is there any humanitarian, compassionate grounds under which the Polish government would help these Ukrainian women in these desperate situations?
Thank you very much, Ms. Frey, for this question. No, there is no any humanitarian setting when you can get access to reproductive health services, especially the abortion services. But we have many informal initiatives, women's initiatives. Above all, my foundation, we provide all refugees who contact us with access to safe abortion. This is not only with using pills, which we order for them from Netherlands, but also in some cases, we do this in Polish hospitals. We have a group of friendly gynecologists and hospitals. So we use this exception for legal abortion in Poland in the case when there is a threat for a woman's health or life. And we use in such situation mental health. So we organize a network of psychiatrists who consult women, and then they issue them a special statement that continuing this pregnancy will threat her mental health. And these abortions are done publicly in Polish hospitals. Of course, not at all, because additionally we have also conscientious clause used by many gynecologists. But in some hospitals, it's accessible with this certificate.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kapoor.
Thank you.
This is an extremely important issue for these women from Ukraine and in
Dr.
other
Fry, you're out of
areas.
time, I'm afraid.
Thanks.
Thank you. We will now go to Mr. Bergeron. Mr. Bergeron, you have 1 minute, sir. Essentially one question.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Madame Terroux-Séguin, I'd like to follow up with my colleague from Shefford. Many people expressed that in many areas of the world in Africa that culture renders abortion quite an alien feature to the culture. They're quite opposed to it. Now, whether it is illegal and illegal, a formal and informal process, if it becomes a domestic issue, I'm talking of abortion, of course, well, no, the interdiction will not reduce the number of abortions. Whether it's in Africa or Latin America, the majority of abortions, 3 out of 4, are not safe, have a risk, and under very dangerous circumstances and situations. So in 2006, it was mentioned earlier, 36 African states signed the Maputo Agreement, which recognized the need to recognize abortion in cases of rape or threat to the mother's life. Abortions occur, but not often in safe conditions.
To MP McPherson, you have
Thank
a
you,
minute.
Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask this question to Ms. Kapoor again. We've heard multiple times today and in previous testimony that stopping access to abortion does not stop abortion. It stops safe abortion. It stops the ability for women to access health care safely, and it risks their lives. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about who is most impacted by this? What women are least likely to be able to access health care when access to abortion is restricted? Ms. Kapoor, that was for you.
You need to unmute, Ms. Kapoor.
It's okay. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. Again, yes, of course, this is, as I told before, this is the reproductive injustice, because this draconian, very restrictive law beats into the poorest, underserved people with no privilege, living in small towns and villages, with no money, because, this is easy access to abortion for those educated, living in big towns and having money. But the most difficult access is for women in difficult pregnancies right now. These women are really dying in Poland because, of course, these are wanted pregnancies. And after the prenatal test, a woman discovered that her fetus is seriously damaged, is the lethal impairments. And she is not aware of this fact until doctor translate her the result of the test. She usually she doesn't want to continue such pregnancy. And this exception for legal abortion was excluded from the Polish law. We had in Poland...
Thank you, Ms. Kapoor. I'm afraid we're out of time.
98% of legal abortion because of fetal impairment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On that note, let me say thank you very much, Ms. Kaspura. Good to see you again. Thank you to Ms. Thoreau-Sagan and Ms. Okafor. Very, very grateful for your time and your perspectives, and it will certainly be reflected in our report. Thank you. So. To the members, before we adjourn, two quick matters. First of all, the budget for the study of sexual and reproductive health. It has been sent to all the members. Is it the will of the committee to adopt the budget? Yes, everyone's good with that. Thank you. With respect to Bill C-281, in consideration of that particular bill, is it the will of the committee to submit their witness lists by this Friday, 5 p.m.? Yes? Excellent. Thank you ever so much. Adjourn.